There's new data out on this that is pointing to tougher conditions ahead. CFO turnover is rising above levels seen the past 2 years. This is according to research conducted by the recruitment firm Christ Colder. Bloomberg's Nina Trentman joining us right now, who helps lead our CFO newsletter. And I think you've probably been a busy person over the last few weeks here, because we've had a lot of transitions in that CFO space here. What's been driving that?
Yeah, I think you're right. We've had quite a few changes, and we've all, of course, been wondering what's driving it. I think Chris Colder pointed out there's a few factors looking at turnover that is increasing, as well as then tenure that's getting shorter, as well as the amount of external versus internal appointments that we've seen. And I think combined, they all point to this darkening economic environment where companies are willing to say, okay, well, what's working and what isn't, and the setup that we currently have probably isn't, which is why we've seen an increase in changes, even though also the summer months is often when CFO changes happen, because there's always a bit of seasonality to it. If you're seeing that your year isn't going too well, then you might also say, okay, well, let's change now, rather than to say, okay, let's drag it into the second half of the year, where you can't really change the narrative of the year as a company.
What are the metrics that CFO recruiters are relying on? I mean, I imagine stock price is definitely one of them, because the CFO would be more responsible for that than perhaps other C-suite positions. But what else are they looking at?
So for recruiters, I think probably the most interesting metrics are turnover, as in how many changes do you have in the first place, and then also how much do you hire from the inside versus the outside.
Okay.
And also then how long are people staying. And I think whilst turnover is up and external hires are up, the tenure is down. And so that tells us that people are looking more to the outside, and they're also getting rid of their CFOs more often, which happens more in times where you have an economy that isn't doing too great, and where companies are, as you said, looking at their share prices and they're saying, okay, well, this isn't what we want to tell investors going forward.
Is this also partly a testament to just how much that role has changed? I mean, we have a special program that we do on Bloomberg called Chief Future Officer, a play off the CFO title, which is more kind of a nod to the idea that they're more than just bean counters and accountants the way that we used to think of them back in the day. But I also think that means that the skill set has to be broader, which also means that it's probably a tougher job and harder to find the right person.
That's fair, and that's true. Of course, we have seen that shift in CFOs in terms of what they're doing. You pointed it out, less so bean counters and more strategic. We have seen an increase in CFOs that turn to become CEOs. We've also seen shifts towards more operations, so shifts towards the chief operating officer role. But I think also it's testament to the fact that the economy is changing, and therefore companies are saying, okay, well, I used to have a growth-focused CFO and who helped me grow my business and who was more focused on doing that. And now companies are saying, well, the economy is changing, and therefore I need somebody who is willing to wield the axe. And of course, not surprisingly, you would be more open to finding an external person who is doing that, because they have not necessarily the same strong ties to certain divisions, certain people, and might just be willing to be a bit more aggressive in cost cutting.
It's not just the economy that's changing as well. Politically, we might get a big change, and so that might mean a change in policy too. How do you see the election impacting these searches?
Yeah, it's a good point. It's something that basically continues what we've seen recently, when we had a survey that was saying, okay, a third of CFOs are delaying investment decisions. And now we're also hearing from recruiters saying, well, actually, looking at the two candidates and the different policies that are being proposed, let's wait, if we can, with making a CFO appointment, given that depending on who wins the election, you might see big changes in tax, or you might not. We don't necessarily know yet, but depending on who wins, if you have the time and you don't necessarily have to appoint somebody right now, you might want to appoint an interim CFO and say, okay, I'm going to do my search, I'm going to look at the candidates, and I'm going to only make an appointment once November, the election on November 5th is over.
Buy some time, in other words.
Right, buy some time, just because, of course, it can make a huge difference. If you have a tax specialist being one of your candidates, and then on the other side you have somebody who is more experienced in navigating trade tensions, just to name two of the scenarios that we might see that could make a difference.
Two of many scenarios. Nina Trentman, thank you so much. Nina Trentman with her coverage on CFOs.